This forum that we're having this afternoon is about harm reduction and what's happening in Canada. As you know, a year ago, more than a year ago, the permit for Insight, the Vancouver Safe Injection Facility, was to expire at the end of this year, and there was a big issue as to whether or not the new federal government, Harper's government, was going to eliminate the permit for Insight, and it became a very big issue across the country. And in fact, what they did was, because of the enormous public pressure, the permit was renewed to the end of this year. And of course, this year it's become an issue again because we didn't know what would happen. And as you've probably read in the news, the permit has now been extended to June, so another 6 months. However, on the one hand, while that's a victory, and I don't have a shadow of a doubt that the reason it was extended is because Mr. Harper finally understood that there has been very, very broad support for Insight, not just in Vancouver, but across the country. And they couldn't close it down, frankly. I mean, politically, they could not close it down. However, the future of Insight is still very uncertain. If you can imagine, for the folks who work there, certainly for the users who use Insight, to not know whether it will be there beyond June produces a lot of uncertainty. Coupled with that, in the last federal budget, when we were looking it over, myself as well as a number of groups who work around harm reduction were very alarmed to see that in the last federal budget there was some very big announcements about that there would be new legislation around drug control, there would be programs around treatment and prevention, but there was absolutely no mention of harm reduction. So the last federal budget, and of course just about 4 weeks ago, an announcement of the so-called new anti-drug strategy, and again, a complete absence of any reference to do with harm reduction. And so I think one of the challenges that we have is to try and move it off that agenda and to reinforce the huge medical and scientific evidence that exists that shows that Insight and other harm reduction programs, not only do they work, not only do they save lives, but they are a very key component of a comprehensive policy. It is about Insight, but it is about harm reduction overall and the fact that it's now threatened. We are expecting more legislation in Ottawa that will focus more on enforcement as a mechanism for dealing with drug use. So that's something that we need to pay very close attention to. And we need to fight really, really hard to make sure that harm reduction is part of Canada's drug strategy, and more than that it has resources and support from the federal government to actually operate, because many of the groups really struggle to keep going. And many of these programs across the country, and I've heard this in many different places, are very fragile, they're very insecure. First off, we'll be hearing from Philip Owen, who is a former mayor of Vancouver. And Philip was the mayor that took the leadership to develop and bring in and have city council support, and then took it across the country to other cities. What we call now the four-pillar approach. So back in, well, how many years ago, Philip? 10 years? Yeah. The four-pillar approach was under the leadership of Philip Owen, and Philip has done an incredible amount of work since he left City Hall to continue with this work. So I think that's a great testament to his commitment to this issue, that he still continues now on an international scale to talk about the four-pillar approach and to talk about what we've done in Vancouver and why it's successful. So please welcome former Mayor Philip Owen.
I'd like to just give you a little history of this. You mentioned the four-pillar approach, which is prevention, education in schools to prevent people from starting drugs, treatment, treat those that are addicted, enforcement, which is the police activity, particularly for drug dealers that are not drug users. I think that they are basically murderers. And harm reduction, which is the most important part of the whole exercise. And I'll explain to you why I'm absolutely shocked to listen to Tony Clement and Stephen Harper. They don't even understand what the word means. It means that when someone is taking drugs, and you'll see them on the downtown east side now, and they're broken bodies, they're damaged people, they're hurting, they're in pain, they're in ruin, they've lost their skill sets, and they're hungry, and they're spending all their money robbing your car and stealing your purse, I think, so they can shoot drugs into their arm. And the idea is harm reduction, have policies and programs to reduce the harm to that person so that you can develop an exit strategy and get them into forms of counseling and into the healthcare system to rescue them from the plight they're in and eventually develop an exit strategy for them. So to have the federal government not even want to use the word and take the words harm reduction out of their drug policy is an absolute shocking disaster, and it just shows you how totally out of it they are. And they're totally wrong, because these pillars are used all around the world, and I'll tell you briefly about that. So what's the history of this whole issue about narcotics? Well, Mackenzie King, who became the Prime Minister of Canada, was the Minister of Labour in 1908, and he put through Anti-Opium Act that was passed by the Parliament of Canada in 1908, Anti-Opium Act. That was 100 years ago. So I ask you, how are we doing so far? Is it going pretty well? You know, and then the United States came in 1914, and they brought in the Harrison Act, which was an anti-opiate act. And it forbid the dealing in or the consuming of opiates. 1914. That was 93 years ago. I don't know how well you think they're doing now, but it's got nothing but progressively worse ever since. In 1934, the international community gathered and signed all sorts of documents about what they were going to deal with international drug trafficking and the movement of heroin and cocaine and things about marijuana, and nothing much happened with that until 1961, when the United Nations amended it, etched a document, signed it, and they refuse to review it now. They won't let the international community discuss or debate it. 1961 is where they're stuck, the United Nations. They're under the great influence of the United States, and that's why that document will not come to the surface and be debated internationally. In 1986, President Ronald Reagan said, and he got a bill and he passed it, got it passed through Congress, that America, this is 1986, America will be drug-free in 8 years. And there was clap, 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 and all the congressmen put up their hands, and that was the end of it. Nothing was done to that. That was just a bunch of verbal nonsense that there was no meat put around it. It didn't mean a damn thing. And then the United Nations in 1998, a General Assembly passed a unanimous document, and it said in 1998, the world will be drug-free in 10 years, in 2008, which is about 65 days from now. You know? How have they been doing? I mean, all this nonsense for 100 years ago, and there's many more of them, and I'm not going to, there's others that have passed in the 20s, and I didn't want to bother that, but there's been about 15 or 20 acts and agreements and documents passed and voted on and in the press, and everybody backslapping themselves, and nothing happens. The issue on the streets with the human decay and the human destruction has just gotten continually worse. And the final one is someone that I have real difficulty with, even watching on television, when George Bush in 2003 State of the Union address. I heard it, I couldn't believe it. I phoned our daughter, she lives in Washington, works for ABC News, and I said, I think I heard the president say something. Can you send me a copy of that? She emailed me the speech, and that's what he said. He said at the annual address to the American citizens in the world that we're going to stop illegal drugs from coming into the United States of America and treat those that are addicted. And there was all kinds of clap, 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 clapping. It's wonderful. What's the problem? Well, we've got illegal drugs coming in. There's the people are. Oh, and people, yes, there's a lot of people addicted. Well, if we don't let any more drugs into the United States, and we treat everybody that's addicted, that'll solve the problem. That's what he said. And there was no money put around it. There was no meat put on it. It was just a lot of verbal garbage. And talking about Safe, and there's been many other things he said too, but I won't go into them because I haven't got the time. Libby said we only got about 10 minutes each, so I've got to move along. Safe injection sites. Over and over and over. Talks about this only safe injection site in Vancouver in North America. I have phoned people in the Sun and the Courier and the Province and people at Global and even the TV people I've talked to once in a while. Can you not indicate somewhere that there's more than one safe injection site in the world? Well, I'll tell you, folks, there's over 100 of them in over 50 cities, and they've been in Switzerland for 20 years. And it's just incredible. We know that because my wife Brita and I, in the last few years, have traveled to international conferences, and we've been in Belfast and Lisbon and Paris and New York, and it's just incredible to listen around the world to what's been going on and what's happening. And we've been to a lot of cities, and I've visited a lot of safe injection sites, and I've seen what they do in Switzerland and what they do in Germany. As a matter of fact, 2 years ago, but this time we were in Kabul, Afghanistan for a week to a Senless Council meeting. And there's talk about us going back to Kabul for another meeting next year. So I'm giving a perspective from grassroots in Vancouver up to what we've observed on the international scene, people we've talked to and people that we've met. The mayor of Frankfurt said to me, we wanted to put in a safe injection site. This is in the late 90s because Switzerland's had them for 15 years and they're very successful. And he had a public meeting like this. He told me there was 535 people there, yelling and screaming and placards, and they were going to throw the mayor out and all of council, and how dare you put in a safe injection site. And that's what they're called in Switzerland. He, at 10 o'clock at night, said, ladies and gentlemen, I know you're all upset. Council has discussed it and council is here. We've already agreed that we're going to do it. And I'm going to say now that what we will do, we will open this for 6 months. So 6 months from tonight, let's all come back and we'll assess it. We haven't got one here. Let's try it. They had an open drug scene like they had in Switzerland, and he wanted to shut it down. They opened a site in Frankfurt. I said, well, what happened in 6 months? Well, I got to the meeting at 20 after 7, and by 20 to 8, there was only 15 people in the room. I started the meeting at 7:45, and I said, does anybody want to speak about it? And nobody said a word. They were just coming to observe. And he said, I was in my car driving home at 8 o'clock. He said, that was 4 years ago. You couldn't shut that down in Frankfurt if you wanted to. Citizens wouldn't stand for it. It works. It's very successful. Same thing with Sydney, Australia. I mean, they're all over Europe. Sydney, Australia, the Lord Mayor of Sydney, Australia told me that he wanted to put one in. They got challenged. They went to a lower court and won. They went to Court of Appeal and won. They went to Supreme Court in Australia and won. And he said now it's just totally accepted by the citizens of Sydney, Australia, as it is all over Europe. And it's just, I think we were in Belfast, and there was a chap from Germany there, and they were talking about the 100 sites that are around. And I said, well, if there's 100 all over Europe, how many are in Germany? Because you're indicating maybe a lot more of this. Well, we have 20 officially, so of the 100, 20 of them are ours. But we have 2 or 3 times that because they're all over the place and nobody does anything or says anything. They're in community centers and healthcare centers all over. And we have many more than that. But there's only 20 that are officially sanctioned by the federal government, and that's why it works so successfully there. What is it? Well, the safe injection site is all about public health and public order. Isn't that the problem? Public health, problem. Public order, problem. What's a safe injection site? It addresses that. So if you want to continue with this horrible street scene that's going on all over, Hay River, where the Mountie was just shot, what I heard a young chap, they said there's nothing but drugs up here in Hay River, Northwest Georgia. It's in every single city. I traveled across this country twice with the movie Fix with Nettie Wild, Victoria to Halifax. And it was just incredible. Everywhere we went, there's drugs. And people that know will tell you they are all over the world. And what is the idea of a safe injection site? The goal is not to encourage use. This is what Stephen Harper, Tony Clement think. Safe injection site is sanctioning drug use, encourage drug use, get your drugs illegally, go and put them into a government facility, therefore we're supporting that. The goal of a safe injection site not only is underpinned by harm reduction, but the goal is abstinence. It's abstinence. And I can't get any of the media to talk about the goal being abstinence, and there's over 100 of them in 50 cities around the world. That's apparently of no interest to anybody other than those of us, I guess, that are in this room. And to extend this license for our safe injection site from the end of December to the end of June is one of the most upsetting things I've ever heard in my life, because he knows he's going to have an election, probably not this fall, but in the spring. And when you talk about this, oh, no, don't talk about that. We've extended it. I mean, that's not an issue. We can't do it. We're going to just sort of punt that out of the discussion during an election. And then they'll shut it down later. And it's just political gymnastics, and that's what Libby spends a lot of time. It's political posturing, political nonsense. And to hear Randy White say that, and he's a Reform Alliance, I don't know what he is, not anything, a conservative from Abbotsford, that that harm reduction is harm extension. That's what he says. And Tony Clement, well, let me tell you what Tony Clement said about it. I got a quote right here from an email. I'll just give you a couple of quotes of what he had to say about it. At a Canadian Medical Association meeting 2 months ago, that's in late August, Tony Clement, was quoted saying, "Harm reduction, in a sense, takes many forms. To me, prevention is harm reduction, treatment is harm reduction, enforcement is harm reduction." So if you have enforcement, that's how you get rid of the issue. You just get billy clubs and paddy wagons and you whack them on the head and throw them in a paddy wagon, throw them all in jail, all the users, because that's one of the reasons that he's talking about. Enforcement is harm reduction. They don't even know what it means. The following day, a petition signed by 130 physicians and scientists was released condemning the Conservative government's politically deadly misrepresentation of the positive evidence for harm reduction programs. And there's no doubt in Vancouver, the media are on side in supporting the four pillars approach, which includes harm reduction as one of the main pillars. And the citizens by 85 to 90% support it when we brought it out. And I bet you it's over 75% right across the country. And the Conservative government are out of step with reality. There's been 24 peer reports. I said to two senior Conservatives I know, why can't you ask your Prime Minister, Tony Clement? There's been 24 peer reports supporting safe injection sites. They've come from scientific areas and medical areas in England a lot, Europe, Canada, and United States. All positive. Why can't you get one of the 50,000 employees you've got in your government in Ottawa, two of them, to sit down, read the 24 reports, and then give me on 8.5 by 11, one sheet of paper, what do the 24 peer reports supporting the safe injection site say? And then you'll listen to what the world says, and then do a poll in Canada, and you'll find that this government is absolutely, totally out of step. What's going on in the United States? Well, June the 21st to 26th of this year, the U.S. mayors had their annual meeting in Los Angeles, 5 days from there. I've got the email to explain. It's fascinating. Rocky Anderson, who's the mayor of Salt Lake City, someone I know. I met him when I was in the Olympics, and this was 2002. And he put forward a motion. And the motion that he put forward to all the cities represented by their mayors in Los Angeles last June was, the war on drugs has failed. And, ladies and gentlemen, it passed unanimously. Unanimously. Every single mayor that was there agreed that the war on drugs has failed in the United States. So, I mean, who's right and who's wrong? And I have to stop now. My time is up. I just want to say to Mr. Harper, you cannot incarcerate your way out of this. You've got to, and that's what the United States has tried to do, and they lock up 2.3 million people every night in the United States. They got 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's prison population. They had 200,000 people in prison in 1970. They've now got 2.3 million. They incarcerate more people for drug offenses in the United States than all of Europe for all criminal offenses. And there's 100 million more people in Europe. And Europe doesn't have the drug problem that the United States does. So let's get with it. Mr. Harper, listen to the facts, listen to the medical evidence, and listen to the people that elect you. We are the government. They are supposed to represent us. And when we tell them something should be done, it's their obligation to do it. And these people have got blinkers on, and they're just told us to take a hike and we're going to dictate because we got political rhetoric, and we're not going to listen to the medical facts and the scientific evidence. Thank you very much.